Not seeing anybody else pop in, so this may be, we may have everybody. Thank y'all for joining us. Just as a reminder, um, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, or you can just type in the chat. All right, I think this is going to be it. All right. Good evening. My name is Trey, librarian here, Plano Public Library, and monitoring the chat is Eric. So, Eric, feel free to jump in if I miss someone's question and just let me know. We're going to be talking about preservation basics tonight. So basically learning how to preserve old documents and photographs. Um, how many of you have started some sort of preservation project of your personal or family archives, or have attempted in the past? Yeah. Okay. A couple, one or two of you. Okay. Yeah, we all have, whether we realize it or not, even if we've just moved something from one box to a cleaner box or a new box. Yeah, that's in essence, we're taking at least some step to preserve our collections, right? So that's kind of the essence of what we're talking about. So why really? Well, you may have family archive records that you would like to keep for future generations of your family. Um, it may be items that tell a story of your family history. It tells, portion of your family story. It may be your family story is intertwined with that of your larger community. Um, you may just have some family treasures that have that connection with the community that tell that broader stories and that interconnectedness. It may be simply just proof of an event or explanation of why an event occurred that a family member or yourself or ancestor had witnessed and wrote about or kept newspaper clippings about, or what have you. Um, but it doesn't have to be necessarily genealogy and family history related stuff. It could just have collector or historian interest. You may have a hobby where you enjoy something, and as most collectors or historians, they collect some of the ephemera surrounding their hobbies. So if it's, as an example, if it's you collect or dabble in older sewing machines, you enjoy sewing, you may collect um, old manuals or pamphlets or things pertaining to your collection. So you want to protect those because depending on the age of your collections or in historical interest in some of those items, um, you want to make sure to be able to keep those things at hand and in good order. All right, so tonight for your learning objectives, we're going to provide some basic guidelines for your storage environment, some things, some steps you can do to help protect your collections. Um, we're going to go through and hopefully you'll learn some basic best practices of some of the archival supplies that are used. Um, doesn't need to be expensive. Also, some archive supplies are rather pricey if you're trying to do it on a level like a Smithsonian collection storage, and that's or a larger museum. That's typically out of our budget. We can try as a collector. We can try, but it's doesn't need to be. But there are some basic things that will be helpful. And then hopefully we'll get to a section, well, not hopefully, we will. We'll get to a section where hopefully you'll discover some basics of doing a digitization project and what that means. I will pause here for a sec and just um, comment about, preservation, the term preservation versus conservation. Those are two different things. with the preservation, we're talking about um, stabilizing something, an object, papers, books, photographs, negatives, stabilizing so it doesn't deteriorate further, either in where and how we store it, in the containers that we store it in. Whereas conservation may be getting into something that's more in the realm of the museums and archives, where they're, something is damaged or aged or crumbling, and they're doing some conservation work to maybe put the shards back together, um, stabilizing it for future generations. We're not talking about that. Uh, the crumbled newspaper pieces. We're not putting Humpty Dumpty back together. We're just trying to keep Humpty Dumpty from cracking in the first place. I guess is the best, funniest way to think about it. Okay, so reviewing your collections. That's one of your first steps if you're thinking about. I know a lot of times we don't think about this until we're looking for something years later and go, I really should have stored this a little better, or I need to move this to a different closet, or out from under X, Y, or Z. So yes, pick a time, plan to review your collection, and just see what you might have that you would like to preserve. Make sure something hasn't become damaged, or maybe something is in less than ideal environment that you need to maybe address. Be better to address it sooner than later. Because for many items, once the damage has occurred, there's no undoing that. There's no putting that toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak. I'm full of euphemisms tonight, apparently. But review your collections. You might have sentimental treasures. You might have historical documents, family historical documents, any legal or financial documents, current or past for family. As I mentioned, proof of events. You may have primary or secondary resources for a community event or event your family participated in. Photographs, physical prints of photographs and negatives, or it might just simply have some clothing or toys or other little items in your collection, um, unrelated to family, that are of interest, um, to either other collectors or historians. So one of the things to kind of, there's no really, I don't know if you call this, it's not an idiom, IDOM. There's no really nice, fun way to say that, but it's just four things to remember. Identify, find your items, and we're going to have this duplicated. You'll see this in a couple of places through this presentation. Identify the items, find what you want to preserve and that you want to keep long term. Decide what's important to keep. You know, my wife accuses me of keeping a lot of things that aren't really important. They may be important to me at the time that I decided to keep them, but long term, you really good practice to set aside some time, go through those a few times throughout the years, and just evaluate and reevaluate. Is this still important? Is this still relevant to tell either my family story or part of my collections? Um, Organize. It's great practice to sort by the type of format. So keep photographs together, documents, books. I know there's the desire to just, this box's great grandfathers, pile everything pertaining to great grandfathers in this box, regardless of format. But that may have stood the test of time for at least a little bit. But long term going forward, it'd be best to kind of sort items by their types. They have some slightly different storage needs depending on what it is. And then if you're it also helps when you're thinking about the latter part. If you're thinking about a digitization project, you're going to have to do this organization thing and sort by types and sizes and things anyway. Um, uh, is part of your process for digitization, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it also helps to sort the who, the what, the when, the where, and the when, just to identify the items. And then you can even go further by sorting it by year, location, person, and that kind of thing. Just as any other backup for any digital files, anything you may have digitized already, um, make copies. Make copies of those digital files. Um, DVD is not exactly an archival format, but sure, it works. Um, It'd probably be better now to just use the USB storage devices or a external hard drive, or a solid state drive, any kind of the new um, external storage um, would be pretty good. Just make multiple copies and keep them in multiple locations. So store the additional copies in multiple locations. So you don't want to keep all your copies at different corners of the same house, because if you have a house fire, you've lost all your copies. So keep a copy with another family member or a close friend, safe deposit box, what have you. That gets the point across. But stop, get them out of the attic, and in Texas, the garage too. Those are really terrible places to store stuff. And I remember growing up, maybe we're hotter now, but I remember we stored everything in the attic as a kid. It was my grandmother's attic was a treasure trove of history of all manner of stuff that seemingly survived in those hostile environments of an attic, all the summers and the winters. But that's really the number one thing to remember about preserving your materials is you controlling the storage environment. That's really the most important thing to help with preserving your collections and maintaining them much more long term. Um, and yes, I'm sad to say it's almost like this photo example. I've had stuff wedged into a small shelf in the corner, higgledy piggledy myself. It happens. Life happens. But we can always aspire to something a little neater, budget allowing. So how do I preserve my archive? Well, we've got this wonderful graphic from the Texas Archive of the Moving Image that really kind of illustrates some of the do's and don'ts really well. You want to control the temperature, the humidity, the light exposure, dirt, dust, and you want to use the right kind of enclosures, right kind of containers. And in this example, they've got the green, which are safer spaces to store items, and then the red, the unsafe storage areas. So they've got the attic, they've got the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, the garage, they're right next to the washer and dryer. Because what if you have a nice large utility room, but you have your archive boxes, your papers, and your family photos and things, and then what happens when you have a disaster with a washing machine and you have a plumbing leak? It floods everything. It damages, and you run the risk of losing your collections. So not a great space. Always try to limit um, handling the actual originals, your originals. Just careful and limited handling. When you're talking about digitization, that gives you a wonderful way to. It helps. It doesn't do anything to preserve the physical document, but it limits how many times you have to handle the physical document. So you're not constantly referring back in your research, let's say, and flipping your uh, fragile pages back and forth and or fragile photographs. You're looking at the copies. You're working from the copies for your research, and you can keep your originals safe. All right, button's not working. There we go. So some of the storage conditions, things to remember: temperature. Heat accelerates deterioration. Heat is bad. Um, Humidity, high humidity can be bad. Too low of a humidity can be bad, depending on the object. Just like what's comfortable for us to live or work in, a nice median temperature all the time and nice median humidity, is basically the same environment that your collections would prefer. So typically, ideal environment, this is not set in stone, but yes, it's kind of a temperature range, but a constant 70 degrees is a good target. Now, I've seen museum resources that state a range of temperature of 65 to 75 is okay. Um, same thing with relative humidity. A 30 to 50%, usually just around 50% is a good happy medium. Because anything more than like the 65%, that's going to provide more moisture in the air, which that's going to lead to a lot of problems depending on the item. So it might lead to softening or swelling of emulsions on photographs that could lead to damage. It also creates an environment for mold growth. On the flip side, too low a humidity, that can lead to drying out and brittleness of papers and photographs. It also increases the static electricity. So if you're handling, it's very low humidity and you're handling um, cassette tapes, any kind of media that's stored on old magnetic tapes, VHS tapes, beta, reel-to-reel sound recordings or cassette tape recordings, those type of things. Uh, Handling those without certain precautions, that static discharge from low humidity conditions can cause permanent damage to that recorded material. In the case of papers and photographs, light, the ultraviolet light is can be bad. It can help accelerate, not that it's helpful, it can accelerate or weaken paper fibers. It'll bleach out papers or images that are photographs. It causes the dyes to fade and change, especially in color photographs that are not a silver gelatin emulsion. It's color photographs are made up of dyes, colored dyes, very susceptible to light fading, to UV fading. And that damage is cumulative and you can't reverse it. Once it's become damaged, as in this example here, there's no getting back to that. There's no fixing that. Um, Kind of similar example, like newspapers. You may have newspaper clippings or have entire issues of newspapers that you may have saved back. And with time, they don't even have to be exposed to light or air, but newspapers become brittle over time. They yellow, they become very brittle, and that's due to the acid that's used in the manufacture of newsprint of the paper itself. And UV light, certain exposure to air and humidity and things can accelerate that and really escalate the yellowing of the newspaper, especially when it's out exposed to UV light. And whether that's fluorescent light, sunlight, incandescent light, kind of luckily we've gone many places are going more to the LED, which are much better than the incandescent lights. They don't give off nearly the amount of UV lights, and some of them don't give off UV light at all. So that's helpful. Um, but the newspapers, that'll accelerate and they become brittle. And once the newspapers become brittle, you can't reverse that. That damage is done. Um, Kind of one of the reasons it's very important to scan digitized newspapers, because there's just really no way to conserve them. And there's very expensive processes to kind of halt or at least very much slow down. Um, but it's still going to happen and they're going to eventually turn to dust. Um, Dirt and dust, just debris can become embedded in paper. Um, I know we all keep a clean house, but there's still dust that comes in. We're people. We're mammals. We have hair and skin cells and things, and that can distribute onto paper and textiles and photograph surfaces, and all that becomes um, nice little feeding grounds for insects or mold, or it can scratch. In the case of photographs, it can scratch the surface. And if the debris is dust has acidic chemical residue components in it, add that with the humidity in the air, the moisture in the air, and that can start a deterioration process. So controlling the environment, some basic steps, a lot of steps that are kind of like duh, but yeah, just regular housekeeping, dusting, um, use good air filters, window screens. As I mentioned, um, don't really have as much use of incandescent bulbs anymore. So using the low wattage bulbs with dimmers is not nearly the thing it once was. LEDs don't uh, don't release that much UV light or at all, some of them. But if you've got originals on display, and when I'm talking originals, either documents or photographs, just like museums, rotate your displays. Don't leave them up permanently on exhibit. Um, because like I said, the cumulative damage of light exposure, even just being near a window, even if it doesn't receive direct sunlight, um, still has a little bit of a cumulative effect on damaging original items. So it's really best to try to display the copies and just store the originals safely and securely. And definitely avoid basements, the attics, and the garages. Um, Good practice is store your archives in this, close to the center of the home as you can. Temperature and humidity are relatively stable in a modern HVAC home. Um, this is harder for me to do for my home because most of my storage areas are all on the outside along an exterior wall. Not ideal, but that's what I got. So make the best of it. Um, Try to have, if you have a room or a storage area, just make sure you've got good window seals, seal the cracks and crevices. Um, Helps keep insects out, helps the HVAC keep the area more stable. And if it's but has a problem possibly being a high humidity area, you can use a dehumidifier and try to keep the area a little closer around the 40-50% humidity. And just like on display, just keep your archive storage away from direct natural light and just limit your handling. Be careful and limit how many times you access the originals, especially if they're becoming more fragile. So before I go here, let me pause for a moment. Is there any questions so far with what we've covered? Okay. All right. Well, moving on. So, what to do with your treasures? You're pulling them out. You're evaluating them. You're finding what you have. Um, you may have found something like this image here that's got the little dog photo that's got, or actually, I can't tell if that's a photo or a drawing, but it's got some damage. It's got some splotches, maybe or perhaps mold. You've got a photograph that's kind of faded. You've got a photo scrapbook that's falling apart. It's leather cover. Looks like it's got some leather rot. Um, unless you have experience and you have worked at conserving things, which we're not talking about, try not to repair. Don't repair. If it's something really, really, really collectible, find an expert in that type of material and consult with them. But just please don't use any kind of adhesive tape to repair an item. Taping a photo back together or a book or an old handwritten letter, just please no. Um, leave it as is. It's probably survive longer not being repaired, and just digitize it and minimize how many times you handle it to hopefully not provide additional damage. Um, if you have a scrapbook situation where you've got multiple types of materials, um, it might be beneficial to separate the very acidic items like those newspaper clippings uh, from the rest of the items, just because that item like that newspaper clipping can, that acidic um, chemistry can not infect, that's probably the wrong term. It can migrate, that acidity can get into your other items adjacent around that and start damaging photographs or the page that the clipping was taped to or things like that. Um, I've gone back through a lot of my old family scrapbooks, and I've tried as best I can to remove all, paper clips or pins or rubber bands that are holding stuff together, and um, anything like that that can, um, yes, that paper clip has probably been there for 40 or 80 years, but it's now sort of embedded into the paper. And if you ever try to remove that, you're also going to run the risk of tearing. So just be careful. Um, and they can rust. If they're older and they're made of steel rather than aluminum, they can rust. And then simple thing to do is just make sure if you're handling your original items, just make sure your hands are clean and dry, and that the area that you're working in, your work surface, have a nice clean table that's uncluttered, um, with nothing that you can accidentally spill a glass of water or key or something onto your work area. Just keep it nice and clean and uncluttered. Avoid the oopses. So we're going to talk about some paper items. So paper items ideally should be stored in the lignin-free file folders that you then can put into, archival document boxes. This is easy enough to do, and one of the basic things. I go a little bit um, extra step. It can get pricey because the some of these materials. Yes, you can go to office supply store and get folders and file boxes, but they're not acid free. The archival certified items. Is those necessary? Are those necessary? Proper English? Um, Depends. It depends on the rarity or the importance that you place on your materials. Just having it in a clean office supply box sometimes may go a long way. Um, but realize that your pedestrian grade box you're going to find at a big box place or at a big office supply place um, may have as much acid and contaminants as that could transfer to your archive items that would not be desirable. But yeah, separate them oversized documents, put them in file boxes. Again, move staples, paper clips, and strings, uh, and any kind of clip ties. But I take another step, kind of like the example here, and I use these polyester sleeves for some of my more fragile family papers that I've kept. And then I put those into a file folder, and that just helps stabilize it. It gives you ability to pull out this clear little sleeve so you can still read the front and back of a page, but you're not actually always touching the original. So you have a little bit of protection and it holds together. So if it does have a tear, like some of mine are kind of fragile and have already started to tear, the little clear sleeve helps hold things together and you don't lose the bits and pieces everywhere. Um, and you can still view the original, but also this is would be a good plug for the digitization reason again. Um, Basic things for paper items. Periodicals and pamphlets, kind of some of the same kind of things. You can store them in a folder, in a file cabinet, as long as you place them spine down. You don't want the weight um, to pull the pages away from the staple or from the whatever their binding is. Or you can store them in a flip top periodical box. You can find the acid-free archival boxes. Photographs and negatives, as you can imagine, with a lot more variety of photograph material types. There's a lot of different types of storage things that you could use. Um, the main thing is that any of the enclosures should have passed what's called the photographic activity test, the PAT. Um, so if you see that listed from a reputable source, a reputable supplier, um, it probably is legit. But you want to avoid the plastic sleeves, especially if you're storing in a high humidity area or you're moving to a part of the country that's higher humidity, like Florida or the Gulf Coast or something. Um, you want to avoid any of the plastic sleeves. Um, you can use paper enclosures for photographs or negatives. Just again, make sure they're the acid-free archival paper envelopes. And if you're going to use originals in an album, use the little corners rather than applying adhesive tape directly to the face of a photograph and taping it down or to the back. I have some old family albums that are I can't salvage. I can't preserve some of some of the items, some of the photographs, and some of the papers because they've been stuck so well with so much tape that I would destroy the image, just trying to get them off of the scrapbook page. So it's a bummer. You can preserve the albums intact, just store them in a box enclosure. You can always do that. Um, you can store the photographs in their original cases. Um, what we mean by that is if you have some very old photographs, like you've heard tintypes or daguerreotypes of the old things. You may have seen them in the antique stores. They're in a nice little um, tabletop frame, wood frame, usually gilded, and they open. They got a little cover and a little velvet lining. Those are the cases. Um, and it's not just simply a frame, it's actually encasing the photo, protecting the image because the emulsion of that glass plate or that metal plate is can be fragile, and that it is encased into that nice little quote unquote frame, but it's actually their containing case that keeps it safe. So if you store those kind of things, you want to keep those together when they're removing it from that case. Um, it's been stable for 100 something years. It'd probably be best to leave it there and don't mess with it. It hopefully will last another 100 years. If you have any broken glass plates, um, just wrap those up, keep the pieces separate so they don't knock on one another, um, and scrape. And just avoid the PVC, the polyvinyl chloride. Um, those, I'm not sure. You can probably still buy those, but I know they were abundant in the 60s and 70s and photo for selling and for photo albums. And they, especially the old vintage ones, you can tell they smell. They smell like an old swimming pool float. If you're familiar with that, uh, they they smell. But you want to avoid that because that off gassing can damage your photos. It can really destroy photos. I lost a few of my childhood photos that were in some PVC pages because the color photos, the dyes stuck to that PVC and embedded themselves. So when you trying to peel the photo prints out of the album pages, they died. They came apart. It was horrible. So avoid those in modern times. And you're looking for uh, polyester. Some of the, granted, these are just kind of broad terms, but polyester sleeves or mylar sleeves are I think two of the terms used. And again, just make sure it has the label for the P that it's passed the PAT, the photographic activity test. Books and scrapbooks, photo albums and books, and that are fragile, that are coming apart. Just keep them boxed. That'll keep all their pieces, parts, and crumbs together. Um, if you can't remove some of the acidic items like the newspaper clippings, um, you can always interleave those. Interleave. I don't know which is right. You can use a sheet to kind of provide a buffer, so you can have a non-acidic paper, maybe a buffered paper, or a sheet of that mylar or polyester, yeah, polyester sheeting, just to keep that newspaper clipping from transferring even more acid to some of the neighboring pages. And if something falls out, you have an escapee from the page, just don't re-adhere the loose items. Just it's another reason to keep it in the box. You can just place it where it went and close the scrapbook and just keep it together as best as possible. And such scrapbooks might be a great candidate to scan or photocopy the pages for, or just maybe I shouldn't have said photocopy. Maybe I should have put photograph the pages, to access later, so you can avoid having to access in your research so many times a crumbling scrapbook or an album. Mentioned audiovisual materials, the magnetic media before. Just simply any CDs, discs, old computer discs, just handle them by the edges or the center hole. Any open reel or magnetic tape you can hold by the edges of the reel or the outer shell. Just do not touch the spools, the film tape itself. Any kind of recorded film, just handle it by the edge. Store them in an upright position rather than flat. And if it's starting to deteriorate, come apart and giving off a odd smell, then you really need to consult with a specialist that hopefully might be able to copy it to the contents to a different media that hopefully will last longer. I included this. We're not really talking about that, but I just wanted to at least acknowledge this uniqueness of while vintage, it has its own handling issues. It's going to be much more highly specialized than simply doing your own digitization project of photographing or scanning photographs or negatives or scrapbook pages and whatnot. So if you're thinking of framing and displaying some of your items, just quick something to consider, use 100% cotton mat and mounting boards, especially if you're using the original. But again, what I mentioned earlier, maybe don't use the original, maybe use a copy is the best course of action. Of course, acid-free backing boards, if you must, and especially if you're using displaying originals, try to display them in an interior room where the temperature and humidity is more stable, and just do not store or display them above a heater vent or radiator or fireplace, and try to keep some use spacers to offset the frame from the wall to give a little bit of air passage behind for ventilation. But again, preferably view a copy, store the original. And before we get into the digitization, are there any questions so far? Nope. Okay. Feel free, drop it in the chat or the Q&A if you have a question. So we're going to go through this one fairly quickly. We do have a class that we'll be doing this summer on digitization basics, actually. So we'll get into much more depth in this. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly, but this just gives you an idea of why digitize helps with preservation. You're making digital copies so you don't have to handle the originals as frequently, especially if they're fragile. And you can create high quality displays with the prints, and it allows you to be able to share them with family or friends. that's mainly one of the keys. You're trying to research something. You've got the one original fragile piece that you don't want to risk. Well, you wouldn't want to risk actually sending it through, mail or, you know, box carrier or whatnot these days. So yes, digitization, black tongue twister, um, would be a great way to be able to share that with family and friends, to collaborate with research or just share the knowledge. So with digitization, it enables you to convert the physical documents, letters, family documents, photographs, and negatives into the digital form. And not only, like I mentioned, that's easy to share, but it helps protect the fragile originals. But there's really four things kind of we're going to be talking about. Um, Developing a plan, the scanning equipment, software, and storing your digital images. Those are really the four main things to kind of consider. So in planning, it's always good to establish a good workflow. You want to it doesn't have to be exactly this model. This is just an example of kind of a mock-up of a workflow, but you just want to, for consistency and to save your sanity when if you're not good at organizing or going through a process, um, it would be really good to just, you could even draw you out a process. Um, as you're planning, you're gathered your collection together. And then you're looking at these other aspects. You can have more in your workflow, whatever works for you, but just for the quickly considering this, you start out with your collection of documents. You're going to be storing this electronically. You need to think of a name for your collection or a number for how you're going to name each photograph or each document, because you want to be able to find it again. And as you're doing this, you probably got a lot of things you want to collect. So you may have hundreds or thousands of items that you're looking to digitize. Think of your naming scheme first, how you're going to name the files. Then you're going to think about how you're going to create your folder, how you're going to organize the images, what folders are you going to create. Then you're going to go through and actually scan and maybe use imaging editing software for some final adjustments and tweaks, perhaps. And then you're going to save those digital files to the folders that you created in whatever scheme you thought up. And then you're going to make backup copies, right? Because multiple copies in multiple places. And then you start that cycle all over again. That's the basic workflow. And just stay consistent. So you're thinking of setting up your folder. You're going to organize your folders to store your master images. So you're going to have your archival images. Kind of keep it simple. This may be not the simplest of examples, but you're going to have your master folder. These are your archive files. And within that folder, this master folder, you're going to have folders like this example here towards the left, 1984 graduation, 1984 family reunion, 1985 Texas vacation. Keep it descriptive, or you can be descriptive. If you don't want that or you don't work in that way, fine. Do what you want, but also think of maybe future family members that are coming into this. Um, Not necessarily after you've gone, uh, cleaning your estate, but maybe collaborating with you, and you're sharing this to do a family book or getting ready for a major family presentation at a reunion. Might want to have some descriptive text to make it helpful for the other family members that's not in your head to understand what exactly have you done here? What's in the folders? But you want to keep it short and simple. And then the example to the right, 1984 graduation, then you have your files, your archive files, the TIFF format files. Graduation ceremony 1, that's the first photo. Ceremony 2, ceremony 3, so forth. Here's the dinner. Kind of complicated example, but it's just an example. You can make it as simple or complicated as you want. I'd go with simple, but descriptive. Scanning basics. So some of the things to keep in mind is the type of material, the color space, resolution, and the file format. So the type of material we mentioned at the beginning, you're going through and identifying your collection and sorting into type. This is where that previous work will come into very useful. So hopefully you've got all your photos together, you've got your negatives together, your printed pages or your handwritten letters. So you've got those arranged. You can scan, oops, got in the wrong spot. So you can scan and do your workflow by type of material is really nice and handy and efficient. You don't have to keep changing settings. So gather all your black and white photographs together. So when you do the scan settings, you have everything set up as you're doing color slides or color photographs or color negatives. You're scanning from negatives, color or black and white, what have you, kind of clump them together. That'll save some time and be handy. And when I said consider the color space, you can scan the black and white or scanning black and white. You've got bitonal. It's simpler. It's like the printed text in a book. You've got a grayscale. So that would be black and white photographs, potentially handwritten text or a black and white illustration. Or you've got color, uh, color photograph, color illustration, or maybe it's a sepia or albumin print photograph. Maybe the black and white photograph had been kind of toned a color that you'd want to capture that rather than just do it as a grayscale. Example of bitonal is a printed text on a sheet. It's black and white. Really simple. Grayscale photographs, you're capturing as many shades of gray, all the different gray tones. Black and white photograph, black and white negative, or a printed illustration on a printed page. It'd be best to capture that in the grayscale. Color, same thing. Color photograph, color negative, color transparencies. Or you've got a handwritten text on a letter on kind of a cream colored page. I'm looking on two different monitors and they look totally two different colors on my monitors. But you may want to capture that. And sometimes scanning a um, handwritten letter in color rather than grayscale actually might provide a little bit more information um, that's useful to be able to read the handwriting. You might see a little bit more information captured in the scan doing color versus the grayscale. It really depends on the item itself. I have seen and have done it both ways and have been perfectly fine. Um, one handwritten item turned out better in color than the black and white, or sorry, the grayscale, um, because of the it was easy to pick out the handwriting, uh, the weight of the letters, and that family member's style of handwriting in the color than it did in the grayscale. I was able to pick out a little bit more information. It was much more legible. The resolution, you decide on the quality based on you're sorting the larger photos and the smaller photos and all that stuff that you did at the beginning. Simply more pixels, higher resolution. So the example on the left was scanned at 72 ppi, um, which I'm drawing a blank, ppi, pixels per inch. Couldn't remember it there for a moment. So 72 pixels per inch. Um, and then we've uploaded it to this presentation slide. And as you can see, at 72 pixels per inch, it's all blurry and pixelated and gross. It's because it was really tiny. And now by just simply putting it into this presentation slide, it's exceeded its really optimal viewing size by being such low resolution at 72 ppi. But scanning at 600 pixels per inch, we have a really nice photograph, as the one on the right shows. Doesn't have to be 600. It really depends on the size. If it's a small, um, general rule of thumb, smaller than a 2 by 3 inch photo, like a little wallet size photo or something. Like some of the old photos were contact printed with the negative and they're smaller. You might want to do as high a resolution as you can to capture as much information, because you to really view it and you were going to put it into a family book, or you were going to enlarge it to do a print to display. You need that resolution in order to get it to a size that you more likely to want to display from its tiny wallet size photo. If it's a larger photo, to start, anything larger than a 2 by 3 inch, like a 4 by 6 inch, so like the typical drugstore print size and larger, you might could get away with 400 ppi or 600 ppi would be fine. Wouldn't need to go wildly higher than that. Um, may see on the example here, it's got DPI. That's dots per inch. It largely kind of refers to the same thing. It for all practical purposes. Ah, good question. You talking about this scanner control? Yes, this is trying to remember what it was in. I don't think we have this software anymore. But this was a screenshot from a scanning software for whatever scanner this was when we did this screenshot. But whatever we have now doesn't look like this. And it's going to vary, but you're going to see something similar to this, and your whatever scanning software comes bundled with your scanner. Um, it's not on the scanner. It's going to be the software, the controlling software for the scanner, if that makes sense. And then this is just some more examples. We're not going to go into too much detail on this. Just showing you that image, that example blown up even more to show a lot of detail, and basically showed the document size was just a barely a 2.5 by almost 4 inch photo, but look at the detail that comes up with just that 600 um, PPI resolution. Now, kind of format and resolution. So your high resolution file um, for your archive purposes is going to be the TIFF or the PNG. I haven't really seen the JPEG 2000 on the on the scanners I've seen now. That doesn't seem to be an option for some of our new software that I've seen. But TIFF and PNG, they are um, simply, that's just the archive format. They're not compressed as much as other files like the JPEGs. So it's not losing as much information every time you open and close. It shouldn't lose any, but you know, but 400 to 600 PPI in a TIFF is or a PNG is going to be your high resolution archive file. And then the low resolution, you might have heard people say, let me have a low resolution file. Um, that might be the 75 to 200 PPI, or it still could be 400 to 600 PPI, but as a JPEG or as a PDF. Um, those are be smaller file sizes and be easier to share via email if you were wanting to share with family or friends or other collectors or whatnot. If you're interested in kind of deep diving, like I said, we have the digitization basics class will be coming up this summer. It'll be on the probably up on the catalog soon. Um, but also, you've got a lot of resources that you can find um, online. University of North Texas uh, Digital Projects Lab has a lot of interesting um, links, information about scanning standards. And then, of course, the Texas State Libraries had some preservation tips of um, different how to preserve different types of different formats of objects. I'm not saying that you have to go the full um, archival specialist of major museum level, but and I don't have the link, I'm sorry, but you might be able to Google and find it. Uh, the National Parks Service um, used to have this ginormous manual of how to preserve and handle uh, so many different types of artifacts and materials for museums and their historic homes and historic buildings that they have. It's just a fascinating resource. It's huge. If memory serves, it's well over 1,000 pages of stuff. If you want to geek out and go explore, but any other questions? Yeah, if you have any questions um, later on that you thought, oh, I wish I should have asked, please feel free. Go to Ask PPL. Eric's put the link there in the chat. Go to Ask PPL. There's a link for the genealogy questions, and just drop us a line. Let us know. Be glad to help. Be glad to answer your questions. It will, yes. The answer will be online. It will. Eventually, probably give it a few days, it will be up on our YouTube playlist under the Genealogy Center. So the Plano Public Library has a um, YouTube channel, and playlist for the Genealogy Center is probably way down the list, but you should be able to find us, and this will be available for you to be able to view again if you want some of the links that we showed on the slides. Absolutely. So thanks for joining. Hopefully that answers some of y'all's questions. And hopefully y'all are excited about jumping in and seeing what you can do to help preserve some of your treasures. All right. Y'all have a good night. Thank you.